I like poetry, but English poetry is dead and boring, so I decided to try and learn Arabic poetry instead. This is episode 1 of my journey to become the world's best poet. So, Iqtibaas is like an inline quotation from the Quran or the Ahadith, which is permissible as long as it doesn't contain anything inappropriate. If you're wondering, the book is Mizan al-Dhahab by Ahmed al-Hashimi, and he mentions 2 examples of Iqtibaas. He gives one example where someone has quoted Surah Al-An'am and has used it in a good way, and a second example where somebody has quoted a verse from the Quran in a very disrespectful way. The difficult thing about quoting from the Quran is that you've got to make the rhythm of the verse fit in with the rhythm of your poem, and you can't change the wording, otherwise it stops being Quran. But if I want to become the world's best poet, then I'm going to have to master this. So now the challenge is to write a poem using as many Quranic references as possible. And what better way to quote the Quran than a poem about defending its message? Also, the time-lapse was fake, by the way, so هذا أذان لمن ادعى الإسلام ثم ابتدع فعصى الرسول لمن تلاعى من لا يهديه ثم عبس لما ذكرنا جهولا تبعه حتى أدخله نارا وكان الشيطان للإنسان خذولا ومن أنكر وأول كلاما صريحا ليزعم أنه يرضي عقولا فقد أرضى هواه وبغى تأويلا حتى قال قولا ليس مقبولا وداعي القبر إذ هم أجرى من مات أو قد كان مقتولا يبسط كفيه ليبلغ فاه وليس أجره إلا مأمولا إذا توافقنا أن القرآن حق ومنه والسنة اتخذنا أصولا فكيف تخالفون فيما أقول لما أقول قولا منقولا ما جئتكم بشيء جديد بل نذير من النذر الأولى فهذا ذكر لكم فاحذروه وكان أمر الله مفعولا. So the poem starts off with the declaration, which straight away sets the tone as something that is serious. It's like to say, cut to the chase, there's no time to mess about because the matter at hand is very severe. There's also a slight reference to the Quran, but definitely doesn't count as Iqtibaas. But the usage of ar-rasula instead of ar-rasul, which is in the accusative, is taken from Surah Al-Ahzab. The first verse goes by itself, and from then on, each verse, each line is in pairs. One thing that was very important was to focus on describing behaviors rather than naming any specific groups. And so the first behavior is blind following, and we have our first quotation from Surah Al-Furqan. وَكَانَ الشَّيْطَانُ لِلْإِنسَانِ خَذُولًا. That shaitan is always betraying mankind. The context of the verse is somebody who has taken a friend who has led them astray from the path of the messenger. And similarly, somebody who blindly follows someone else could be led astray from the path by somebody who they trust and they hold dearly. The second is about somebody who reinterprets verses in general and specifically to satisfy their own limited understanding. I recited it as وَمَنْ أَنْكَرْ وَأَوَّلْ, even though the words are actually أَنْكَرَ and أَوَّلَ, simply to make the rhythm flow better. So I don't know if that's like a red card or something, but yeah. The verse was originally فَقَدْ أَرْضَى هَوَاهُ وَبَغَى يُنَانَ, which was a reference to early groups like the Mu'tazila, who mixed their understanding of Greek philosophy with their understanding of the Quranic text, and thus strayed. I felt that it was more important to have a Quranic reference though here, and so I replaced it with وَبَغَى تَأْوِيلًا, which is a reference to Surah Ali Imran. And lastly, we have someone who calls upon the graves or calls upon the dead, seeking some reward from them, and commits shirk by doing so. The significance of perhaps was killed is that a lot of the time, if someone especially was martyred, some people might place even more importance and even more significance in making dua to them. But the refutation comes again from the Quran, from a verse in Surah Ra'd. But this time the wording of the quotation has been changed, so it's not fully iqtibas, it's not fully a quotation. However, the idea is still the same, that dua is only to be made to Allah. And now we have the main question, or the main argument, which is to say that since we agree that the Quran and the Sunnah are true, and we say that we follow them, then how can you disagree with anything that I've said when all I've done is quote them? And that's why it was so important to make sure that every behavior and every idea was responded to or paralleled with a verse from the Quran that addresses it. I really liked the sort of alliteration in qawlan manqula, which was actually what was playing in my head that made me want to write this poem. And we finish off with two more quotes from the Quran, the first of which to reiterate that this is the same message that the Prophet ﷺ came with a reference to a verse in Surah Najm. And lastly, that this is a warning. Take heed of this warning, and that the command of Allah is always fulfilled.